In 1875, German archaeologists broke ground at ancient Olympia, expecting to find the ruins of a sophisticated athletic complex. What they uncovered was a field, a sandpit, and a collection of shaped stones. That was the complete training infrastructure for the athletes whose physiques have been reproduced in marble and bronze for 2,500 years. Modern researchers examining those sculptures assumed the proportions were artistic exaggeration. They were not. So before your next session in a fully equipped gym, you should be asking one question: what did those men know that your program does not? So before your next session, you should be asking one question: what did they know that your program does not? The answer sits inside 5 specific movements, 2 of them recovered from archaeology, and 3 from documented historical records. And the third one on this list is going to expose a gap in your training that most programs never address. I will tell you exactly what that means when we get there. The reason those 5 movements work comes down to a single principle that Greek coaches understood and modern gym design has systematically removed: force production through integrated movement. When you sit in a machine, the seat absorbs the instability, the track controls the path, and the only thing your body learns is how to move that specific load in that specific direction. Take the machine away, and the strength largely disappears. Greek athletes trained without the machine. Every movement demanded that the whole system work together. That is not a philosophical point. It is a mechanical one, and here is what it produced. Number 1. The Halteres Swing. The villain here is the Romanian deadlift. Not because it does nothing, but because the controlled slow eccentric, the deliberate tempo, the careful bar path, all of that stability removes the one demand that produces the most athletic adaptation: explosive hip speed under a moving load. The Romanian deadlift builds strength in a groove. The Halteres Swing builds capacity across an entire spectrum of movement. Halteras were elongated stone or lead weights, documented in use by Greek athletes as far back as 700 BC. Surviving examples sit in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Greek coaches originally designed them for the long jump, where athletes swung the weights forward during takeoff to extend their distance. But something unexpected showed up in training. Athletes who worked with halteres regularly started winning events that had nothing to do with jumping. Their hip drive was sharper. Their trunk was more stable under load. The coaches noticed and started building programs around it. The movement transfers directly to a kettlebell or dumbbell. Stand with feet hip-width apart, the weight hanging in front of you with both hands. Push your hips back and let the weight travel between your legs, keeping your spine long. Then drive your hips forward aggressively. The weight rises to chest height, not because you lifted it, but because your hips drove it. The arms stay loose throughout. They guide the path. They do not generate the force. What this produces underneath the surface is the reason Greek coaches kept coming back to it. The posterior chain, your glutes, hamstrings, and lower back, fires as one unit in a single explosive sequence. That is the same chain that generates speed in a sprint, height in a jump, and distance in a throw. Training it under a moving load with the timing demand of the swing creates a quality that slow, controlled exercises cannot replicate. Your core is working hard the entire time, but not through crunching. It is bracing against a weight that is actively trying to pull your spine out of position on every rep. That kind of anti-flexion strength is what actually protects your lower back when something heavy and unpredictable enters your life. 3 to 4 sets of 15 to 20 reps. Rest 60 seconds between sets. 2 weeks in, your hips will feel like a different tool than they did before. But hip power through one plane of movement is only part of what Greek training developed. Their wrestlers needed something harder to build and much rarer to find in a modern gym. Number 2. The pale stance hold. The villain here is the leg press machine. Seated, back-supported, load moving in a fixed track. The leg press makes you strong in one position, one angle, one condition. Greek wrestlers needed to be strong in every position, every angle, under fatigue that never stopped. The pale was the Greek word for wrestling. And the palaestra, the wrestling school, was where some of the most demanding conditioning work in the ancient world took place. Greek wrestlers trained isometric positions. Low stance, weight forward, arms extended, fighting for control against a body that was actively trying to take them down. Researchers studying the skeletal remains of ancient Greek athletes have found joint and muscle development consistent with prolonged low-stance isometric loading. This was not accidental. It was a deliberate training method, and the results showed up in competition. Here is the movement. Stand with your feet wider than shoulder width. Toes turned slightly out. Drop your hips until your thighs are parallel to the ground. Now lean your torso forward slightly, arms extended in front of you as if bracing against an opponent. Hold. Here is the part that exposes the average gym-trained athlete immediately. Your hips want to rise, your lower back wants to round, and your knees want to cave inward. The hold forces every stabilizer in the lower body and trunk to fire simultaneously under sustained load. This is not a wall sit. The forward lean changes everything. It shifts load into the posterior chain and removes the quad-dominant cheat that a vertical torso allows. Feel your glutes loading hard from the first 10 seconds. By 30 seconds, the deep hip stabilizers are shaking. By 60 seconds, you understand why Greek wrestlers had hip and core endurance that modern athletes trained on machines cannot replicate. 3 positions. Parallel hold for 30 to 60 seconds. Then drop 2 inches lower for another 30 seconds. Then return to parallel and hold until failure. 2 to 3 rounds. 60 seconds rest between rounds. For progression, add a light load held at chest height. The added weight pulls your torso forward and forces the lower back to work harder to maintain position. But isometric strength under a static load is only half the equation. Greek athletes also needed to produce explosive power under resistance that gave way unpredictably. Which brings us to the exercise Lucian documented over 2,000 years ago. Number 3. The Stadion Sand Sprint. Here is the weakness I mentioned at the start. The treadmill is the most commonly used piece of cardio equipment in any gym, and it is producing the weakest possible version of your running capacity. The belt moves for you. Your foot lands on a surface that does not give way. Your posterior chain learns to coast because the ground is doing part of the work. You get fitter, but you do not get faster, more explosive, or more resilient. You get better at running on a treadmill. Lucian, writing in the 2nd century, recorded how Greek athletes trained their sprinters. The practice running, he noted, was not done on hard resistant ground, but in deep sand, where it is not easy to plant a foot solidly or get a grip with it, since it slips away from underneath the foot. This was not a warm-up. This was the primary conditioning method. Greek coaches understood that a surface that resists and gives way forces the hip extensors, glutes, and hamstrings to generate more force per stride than any stable surface can demand. Modern research has confirmed what Greek coaches knew by observation. Sand sprint training produces greater activation of the glutes and hamstrings compared to hard surface running at the same speed. The instability forces your body to recruit more muscle per step just to maintain forward momentum. There is no coasting. Find a stretch of deep sand. A beach, a sand pit, a sand volleyball court. 20 to 30 meters is enough distance. Sprint from a standing start. Drive your knees high and feel the difference in your hip extension immediately. The first stride will tell you exactly how much your posterior chain has been underworked. 6 to 8 rounds, 90 seconds of full rest between rounds. This is not interval jogging. Each sprint is maximum effort. If the last round feels the same as the first, you are not going hard enough. For progression, carry a light dumbbell in each hand while sprinting. Greek athletes trained with weighted jumps over ditches while carrying lead weights. The bilateral load forces the trunk to stabilize harder on every stride. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. This channel covers evidence-based training methods that mainstream fitness has ignored or forgotten. New videos every week. Number 4. The diskos rotational load. The villain here is every crunch, sit-up, and cable rotation machine in the gym. These movements train the core in flexion and in isolated rotation, and that is not how the body generates power. The discus throw was one of the 5 events of the ancient Greek pentathlon, alongside running, long jump, javelin, and wrestling. Pentathlon athletes were considered the most complete physical specimens in the ancient world. The discus throw demanded something that no other pentathlon event trained in the same way: a full hip-to-shoulder rotational power chain, loaded and released under control. Greek discus throwers trained the rotation itself, not just the throw. The mechanics involve loading the hips into a coiled position, then sequencing the release from the ground up, hips first, then the trunk, then the shoulder, then the arm. The chain is the point. Break the chain anywhere, and the power dissipates. Train the chain in sequence, and you produce force that isolated training cannot generate. The modern equivalent is the rotational medicine ball slam. Stand side-on to a wall or open space. Hold a medicine ball of 4 to 6 kilograms at hip height on the loading side. Coil your hips away from the target. Then uncoil, hips first. Drive the rotation through your trunk and release the ball into the wall or into the ground in front of you at the end of the rotation. The ball is not the point. The sequence is the point. Here is what almost every athlete gets wrong on the first attempt. They initiate the movement with their arms. The ball goes nowhere and the trunk does nothing. Reset. Think about your lead hip driving forward first. Let the arms follow the hips. When you feel the difference, you will understand why Greek pentathlon athletes had torso and hip development that modern gym training rarely produces. 4 sets of 10 to 12 reps per side. 2 minutes rest between sets. For a harder progression, slow the loading phase to 3 seconds. Feel the hip coil under control, then release at full speed. The contrast between slow loading and fast release trains the stretch shortening cycle in the trunk, the same way the swing trains it in the posterior chain. But rotational power and posterior strength still leave one system undertrained, the system that Greek soldiers built their entire physical culture around. Number 5. The Hoplite Carry. The villain here is the farmer's carry. Both hands loaded equally, the weight hanging symmetrically at your sides. Your body figures out the farmer's carry fast. The bilateral load is predictable. Your trunk adapts to the demand within a handful of sessions, and the movement stops being diagnostic. You get grip fatigue. That is roughly all you get. Greek hoplite soldiers went to war carrying a full bronze panoply: helmet, breastplate, greaves, and the aspis shield. Combined weight of 20 to 30 kilograms, and not distributed symmetrically. The shield was held on one arm, raised and braced. The spear was carried in the other. The demand on the shoulder holding the shield overhead and the trunk resisting the lateral pull from the hanging arm was continuous and asymmetrical. Hoplites trained to sustain that position through a march, through the collision of the phalanx, and through the sustained engagement that followed. Their coaches built the carry into training because the battlefield demanded it. The modern version uses a dumbbell or kettlebell in each hand, but with the weights positioned differently. Press one weight directly overhead, arm fully locked out. Let the other hang at your side. Walk. The overhead arm is not resting. Within the first 30 steps, the shoulder, rotator cuff, and the stabilizers of the upper back are working hard under static load. Most pressing movements let you set down the weight the moment fatigue arrives. This carry does not. You either hold the position or the set ends. The hanging weight is pulling your torso toward it on every step. Your obliques and deep spinal stabilizers work continuously against that pull to keep your trunk upright. Your hips have to move cleanly underneath all of this while simply walking forward. Any weakness in the chain announces itself quickly. An unstable shoulder begins to shake. A weak lateral core tilts toward the hanging weight. Restricted hips create a lurch with every stride. The carry is a full-body diagnostic that simultaneously forces the body to correct what it finds. Beginners start with 20 to 30 meters per arm. Switch sides and rest 45 seconds between rounds. When you can complete 4 rounds without the overhead arm shaking on the final round, increase the load. For conditioning emphasis, extend the distance and keep the weight moderate. For strength emphasis, increase the load and shorten the distance. 3 to 4 rounds total. These 5 movements cover every physical quality a complete training program needs to develop. The Halteres Swing builds explosive hip drive and posterior chain capacity. The pale stance hold builds the isometric lower body and trunk stability that makes every other movement safer and stronger. The Stadion Sand Sprint builds posterior chain endurance and conditioning that stable surface training cannot replicate. The diskos rotational load builds the hip-to-shoulder power chain that isolation exercises ignore entirely. The Hoplite Carry builds unilateral shoulder stability, lateral core strength, and sustained full-body conditioning under asymmetrical load. What connects all 5 is the same thing that connected every session in a Greek gymnasium. No exercise existed in isolation. Each one demanded that the body function as a system, not as a collection of parts trained separately and assembled later. That integration is what built the physiques that stopped researchers cold when they tried to explain them. Not the volume, not the equipment, the principle. You do not need a sandpit or stone weights. You need the principle behind them. Run these 5 movements for 8 weeks, and the body you are training will start to resemble something that was built to be used, not just looked at. If you want to see how to structure these 5 movements into a complete weekly training plan, that video is on screen now.